Greetings, Earthlings! And non-Earthlings.
What?
Well, who else is there?
I think that about covers it. I want to welcome you to this video tour. We have with us here a screen-used Ensign Sito uniform
From the Season 7 episode, Lower Decks?
Yep, very good.
That was sad.
Yeah, but it was a great episode.
But it was sad.
But it was a great episode.
But it was sad.
It was sad.
Thank you.
Anyway, I want to thank the owner of this costume,
Angelo Capaldi!
yep, for letting us examine it and make this video for you. I also want to thank my coffee supporters. If you want to learn more about the TNG jumpsuits, I've written an actual costume analysis which you can read on my blog,
StarTrekCostumeGuide.com. That's it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
And please stop doing that.
I'm just trying to make it more exciting, Alec.
I appreciate it, but it'd be nice if I was able to...
Video tour.
Well, something that I was actually pleasantly surprised by with this costume was the color. It's actually much closer to how it looked in the show than some of the other uniforms we've looked at, like Tasha Yar's jumpsuit, which looked greenish gold in the show, but was actually like a dark burnt orange, or Dr. Pulaski's uniform, which looked full-on blue in the show, but was actually teal. This is actually quite close to how it looked in the show, at least as far as Star Trek division colors go. I'm looking in my little camera preview window here, and it actually looks pretty close to how it looks in person. It's a little bit in person, it's a little bit cooler than it looked in the show. In the show, it looked more like a warm gold, but here in person, it looks a little bit yellower and a little bit greener, so maybe a little bit more blue. But overall, it's actually quite close. And to help you see how it looks wherever you are, I have a few visual aids here, like I like to do. I have a couple paint chips. Neither one is quite perfect, but they're both pretty close. One is a Valspar CI-78 called Harvest. It's a little bit too orange, so it's not quite perfect, but as you can see, it's a pretty good match. At least the best that I was able to find. And again, we're trying to match paper to fabric, so, it may not even be possible. So it's a little too orange, but it's there in the neighborhood. And the other one is also Valspar? Is it Valspar? Yes, it's Valspar. And it's number 3007-5A, corduroy. And this one's probably closer, but it's a little too yellow and not quite dark enough. It looks good in my little camera preview window, but sometimes it doesn't look all that great. Yeah, you can see there, like all I had to do was rotate it, and you can see it's a little too pale and too yellow, but then I do that, and it looks fine. So this one's not quite there. It's a little too pale, a little too yellow, and this one's a little too dark and a little too orange, but something kind of in between these two. Maybe a good color to reference. I also have my handy Pantone book here, and I was able to get a really good match with the Pantone. Pantone 117U is a good color match as far as paper to fabric goes. Maybe not quite dark enough, but then the next one, 118U, is it's off. It's darker and too green. 117U is better. So there's that. I also have a couple spools of thread. Neither one of them is great. This is Gutermann color 968. You can see here. It's okay. It's maybe a little too orange. And then the other one, I think this is a jeans thread. Jeans or top stitching. It's also Gutermann color 865. You can see here, it's a little closer. And again, maybe a little too dark, too orange. But they're both in the ballpark. So you can have those as color references. Zoom out. Maybe you can see the difference. Yeah, you see, that one's not quite there. There's this one, but they're the closest ones that I was able to find. Now, here's something quite interesting. So we're again dealing with jumbo spandex, like the TNG jumpsuits were made out of, but it was actually cut in a way that makes logical sense, at least to me. It was cut with the stretch going side to side instead of up and down. So this was on the whole body. Let's look at the yoke. You can see the yoke stretches this way. Here's the upper front. You can see it stretches side to side. We move on down to the lower front. Again, stretching around the wearer's body. And the pant legs. Stretches this way. Same across the back. Here are the back panels. Stretches around the wearer's body. Fancy that. Now, this is season 7. A little over halfway through season 7. So I don't know how common practice this was at this point to be cutting the jumpsuits like this. I've seen a couple auction photos where it looks like the yoke was cut in that direction, and maybe the rest of the body was too. And I've seen one Dr. Crusher jumpsuit from the later seasons it was cut similarly to the Dr. Pulaski smock that we looked at. Did a video tour of that one too, where the stretch was up and down on the front, but it was side to side across the back, which gives you some stretch at least. That's better than none at all, where the whole thing is just cut with the stretch this way and no real stretch this way. So this particular uniform was in season 7, and every piece on the jumpsuit was cut so that it would stretch around the wearer's body, which I don't know why it wasn't always done that way, like just right off the bat to begin with. I don't know, but by mid-season 7, this existed. This could just be a one-off, or on the opposite end of the spectrum, it could have been common practice by then that all of the uniforms or the TNG jumpsuits made from, whenever forward were cut in this direction. Maybe they experimented for a while. I don't know, but at least this tells us that the later uniforms were probably a lot more comfortable to wear. And if you're wanting to make a replica and you still want it to, be accurate, that's very nice to know. I think it's very interesting they were cut like this. Even the sleeves. Oh, I meant to mention the sleeves too. You can see the stretch of the sleeves. It stretches around the arm rather than up and down the arm. So, glad we got that straightened out. Now, something that I did not anticipate is the collar, specifically the interfacing, or in this case, lack thereof. I had assumed that the jumpsuit collars were heavily interfaced with some stiff interfacing, maybe like French canvas or collar interfacing or something. But I was very surprised that the collar is actually barely interfaced at all. I mean, you can see I can move it around or fold it. Bend it, but it doesn't stretch. Even though the jumbo spandex would have some stretch to it, it does not stretch. So it is stabilized. My guess would be there's just a single layer of fusible interfacing on the underside of the collar, just enough to keep it from stretching out of place and give it a little bit of crispness. Again, this is for a guest character on the show, so I don't know how common practice this would have been. This was season 7, so everything should have gone like a well-oiled machine at this point. So I don't know if this is any indicator for for the hero uniforms, like Dr. Crusher or Counselor Troy, who was in uniform at this point. I don't know if this is like their collars, if their collars were like this too, very thin, barely interfaced, or if, since this was just a guest character, let's not bother with, lots of collar interfacing or not. So we don't know, but all we can say for sure is that this collar was barely interfaced. Here's something weird that I've seen on quite a few uniforms, but have never been able to actually explain until now, and that's what appear to be separate cuffs at the bottom of the pant legs. You can see what looks like a seam line right here. And my previous theory was that these were separate sewn-on cuffs that were just hack jobs, basically, because my former theory was that for recycled or rather upgraded seasons 1 and 2 jumpsuits with the division colored trim right here in this lower front opening on the pant leg, basically it was just a pain in the butt to remove that, and it took less time to just hack off the bottom of the pant leg and sew on a new bottom of the pant leg with the later style opening without the trim. You see there's no trim here. Removing that was basically a huge hassle, took a lot of time. They just cut it off, put on a new bottom pant leg without that, and that would be faster. Turns out that theory was wrong. This is not a separate cuff that's sewn on. This is actually how they would shorten the pant leg if it was too long. So what you would do, let me turn this to the side here so I can get in closer. You see what looks like a separate sewn on cuff, but in this case, let's say the pant leg is too long. Right, the actress who played Ensign Sito seems to be quite small, very petite, and because of the front opening, you're pretty limited in how much you can hem a pant leg, because if you hem it too much, you end up with this tiny little. Imagine if the front opening was only that small. But to redo that front opening would be a pain in the butt, because you have to take off the facing on the underside, remove all that stitching, press it flat, and then, redo it, sew it up to wherever it needs to be now, slash it open, and, turn it under, press it again, understitch if you want to understitch, then do the hand sewing. It would take forever to raise this split, which can be done. It can be done if you have the time, but under the TV grind, that just doesn't make any sense to spend, an hour or 2 hours doing that. So you're pretty limited in how much you can hem it. So the alternative is to shorten the pant leg above this split. So what you would do, you would fold the pant leg up like this, and then stitch half the distance of however much you wanted it to be hemmed. So in this case, if you had, 7/8 of an inch. So in this case, you need the pant leg to be 1 3/4 inches shorter. So what you would do is stitch half of that distance, which is 7/8 of an inch, from the folded edge right here, like that. And then after you've done the stitching, you fold the pant leg back down, and now your pant leg is shorter. But you end up with this weird thing that looks like a separate sewn-on cuff. But you know what? It was a quick and easy, quick and dirty way to shorten a pant leg when you have this weird thing right here to contend with. It wasn't nearly as much of an issue with the later uniforms like we saw in Deep Space Nine and Voyager, because there was a seam down the center front of the pant leg. Also the TNG movies too, obviously. From generations when they wore the Voyager style uniforms, and then First Contact, Insurrection, and Nemesis, where they wore the later uniforms with the gray quilted yokes. There was always this center front seam that went down. Of course, well, with the later uniforms, First Contact, Insurrection, Nemesis, Deep Space Nine, there wasn't the opening at all. Usually it was just sewn closed down the front. So you could hem it however much you wanted. But with the Voyager uniforms, there was still this split, but there was a center front seam. So if you needed to, hem it more, you would just let that seam out and reinforce it a bit. And then you've effectively raised this opening however much you need to. But with TNG, there was not that seam, and the only way to shorten the pant leg would be to do that. You get this weird cuff thing. You also have elastic stirrups, as always. And here you can see where the stirrup was just top stitched down at the bottom in this kind of square shape. A nice stirrup, keeps your pant leg looking nice and clean underneath your boot. As you're probably aware, some of the later TNG era jumpsuits closed up the front, just like the early ones did, and some of them closed up the back. And there doesn't seem to have been much rhyme or reason to it, other than, generally speaking, the prominent main characters and guest characters probably would zip up the back. But not always. Again, this is a very, very general rule of thumb. There are tons of exceptions. You can check those out in my costume analysis. There are a bunch. But Dr. Crusher and Counselor Troy, they closed up the back. And Nurse Ogawa changed to a back zipping one. And of course, Ensign Sito. Usually with, and especially in the later years, there were more of the back zipping ones. But again, they were all over the place. Part of it had to do with, what uniforms were available, recycled, which ones were upgraded from seasons 1 and 2, which ones were made or custom made for a specific actor or actress. This particular one closes up the back, and it starts with 3 hook and eye closures on the collar, like that. See here. And the zipper tape, most of the uniforms that I've seen had the zipper tape, or the excess at the top of the zipper. Like a zipper will stop, and then there'll be like another 3/4 of an inch or an inch or something of tape above that. Normally, what I've seen is that it's just turned under and stitched down. But what I like to do is actually trim that off and then protect the ends of the zipper with some liquid freight preventer, like Freight Check or whatever. And that's what was done with this one. And then you just unzip it and you mightily pull it across those seam lines. There we go. And that's how you get in and out of it. It's really a matter of, for cosplaying anyway, costuming, whatever, wearing uniform, it's a matter of personal preference, which way you like. I mean, the front zipping is much more convenient, but personally, I think the back zipping versions are much cleaner. It's less convenient, especially if you're a man. You're probably not used to having to zip yourself up the back. Women are much more used to that kind of thing, but it's a much cleaner look from the front, and I'm glad that Robert Blackman and his team started doing that in the show, because I thought it was a much cleaner look across the front. Both in the show and in person, Ensign Sito's uniform looks very clean, but the inside is a very different story. The inside of this thing is crazy. Let's just start at the top. The collar is lined with just some black lining, and you can see the neckline seam allowances are turned up inside the collar, and the lower edge of the collar lining is just hand sewn right there at the seam line. The piping here is in 2 pieces. If you've ever worked with this, you know this stuff starts to fray very quickly. So this edge right here has some protective binding. I don't know what that black fabric is. It probably doesn't really matter. There's just a little scrap of something, and then machine sewn to keep those edges from fraying. And then beneath the neckline here, the 2 pieces of collar piping were sewn together pretty thoroughly just to keep those from separating. And even above the opening, they were hand sewn together just a little bit, again, to keep the collar from pulling open and tearing this open. So I had said the neckline seam allowance goes up into the collar all the way around, except right here at the center front. A little bit in the front right here was diagonally clipped and goes downward, obviously to accommodate the piping here. And then it just keeps going up into the neckline. ever since I first examined that TNG scant, and I saw that they had what appeared to be custom-made shoulder pads, and started seeing that recurring motif through some of the other TNG uniforms that I'd seen, I was very relieved and pleased to discover that these shoulder pads are indeed the same style custom-made pads that that you've probably seen in some of my other video tours. They're encased with lining, and there's some padding inside, and there's a dart. It's basically an oval shape, and there's a little dart that pulls it into this gentle raglan kind of over-the-shoulder shape that's so characteristic of the TNG era uniforms. These pads are a little bit different, though. There's some kind of pretty crisp fabric right here. You can actually see through the lining a little bit, and it's actually poking through a little bit, and you can see what I assume are some long hand stitches. I'm guessing just to firm the pad up a little bit, because it doesn't go all the way down. It goes to about right here. You can see it quite clearly to about where the arms eye of a normal jacket or jumpsuit or whatever would be if you had set-in sleeves. And then this part is just poofy. You can kind of see the same thing on the underside here. But that might just be the padding. Like, you can't really see the lines or hand sewing or anything. It looks like there's just an extra layer of padding here. And of course the characteristic dart. 2 rows of stitching around the edges, and then it was pinked, cut with pinking shears all the way around, and then the 2 snaps. So the pads are detachable, presumably for dry cleaning, or I imagine some of them probably had more loft than others too if you needed to swap them out. So maybe you have some really tall pads for someone with very sloped shoulders, or some very thin pads, very minimal padding for someone with very square shoulders. But that's just a theory. Considering how much the uniforms changed stylistically over the years with Robert Blackman as costume designer, I would have thought that he would have refined a lot of the construction details, but I guess not. If this uniform is any indication, definitely not. I can only imagine he had bigger fish to fry. At this point, TNG was in its 7th season. This was his 5th year on TNG, and his 2nd year on DS9, and Generations was in pre-production. So I imagine his life was just crazy at this point, and he had a crazy amount of work that had to get done. But a lot of the really weird interior aspects of Tasha Yar's jumpsuit are still here in season 7, like changing seam allowances, or seam allowances changing direction. Rather, like, look at this upper front one here. I don't know which direction this is supposed to go. I imagine it's supposed to be open, because they usually were, but stuff to say. This side wants to go up, this side wants to be open. Part of this is probably just due to the dry cleanings over the years, or being on a mannequin. It seems probably just haven't been pressed. But if you look over here, they're actually sewn open. Same thing on this side, but it wants to go up. And of course, these arms eye seam allowances right here are always going to want to poke up. If you want those to go down, you have to actually tack them down right there onto the other seam allowances, but then that creates some bulk, so it's a problem. But also, whoever made this thing did not believe in clipping their stitching all the way to the seam line, just everywhere. There are so many threads right there. You see the bust darts are tied off again, but then everywhere you see stitching, there are threads that have anywhere from 3/4 of an inch to a couple inches on them. See down? Nope, still can't see down there. Move this back. Right there are a couple. There's some on the sides. I don't know if you can see that. Right there. So many threads in this thing. I don't know if that was a time thing. If there just wasn't time, so it's just like cut it and go. Or whoever it was wanted to leave that thread in there for some reason. I don't know, but pretty much every seam has long thread tails in here. And another weird thing you can see here is that these 2 bust darts were done 2 different ways. This one, the dart was slashed down the center for most of it, and then it was sewn into that side front seam open. It was pressed open and sewn in like that. But on this side, look at this. It looks like that the same thing was done, like it was slashed and then pressed open. But, let me scoot this over. It looks like it was slashed like that, but then I guess it was accidentally caught in the stitching going down. So whoever it was that made this just clipped it, and then so this part's open, and now this part is down and caught in the stitching going down. That was probably just an accident. I don't know, but the bottom line is that these two bust arts were done two different ways. And then the classic William Ware Tice issue with seam allowances changing directions is just a recurring motif. I don't know if he didn't know or didn't care or what, but if you look at this one wants to go this way, but it's sewn in open down here, sewn into this seam, and up here it wants to go this way, but then the bust art wants to poke it out this way. So I don't know if maybe these were supposed to be open all the way down. I don't know. Kind of the same thing over here. I mean, it's just kind of a mess. And then look here at the that asymmetrical kind of waist seam. Here they're open, but then here they're down. Here they're open. You know, who knows what's up with that. Here's an interesting detail I hadn't seen before, and that's right here where this front corner is. There's a layer of lightweight fusible interfacing right in that corner area. And of course, you know, when you sew a wedge shape, you would clip the seam allowances close to the stitching, like it's been clipped. And this seam allowance looks like it's been pressed that way. But I hadn't seen this layer of fusible interfacing before. I'm guessing that's, well, I mean, obviously it's to stabilize this area right here. It's either something that costume designer Robert Blackman liked to do, or in this case, since the fabric is stretching this way, trying to sew a corner with fabric that stretches this way could be problematic. And of course, we did see some TNG jumpsuits where that corner got botched a little bit. There was like a pucker, especially on if you look on Dr. Crusher's jumpsuits in later season 6, at least one of her jumpsuits had that little pinch right there. So I'm guessing this is to, stabilize and help prevent that. On this one, of course, I mean, it's been, about 30 years. So the fusible's long since come detached. But it did its job for the show. And really, all you need to do is just temporarily stabilize this area to sew the corner, and then you can go about your business. I mean, it can come right off and do whatever it wants, but you can still see the little flecks of the glue on the underside of the fusible there. Making our way downward, we have more wonky seam allowances. At least it looks like they were supposed to be open all the way down. I don't know what happened right here. Maybe it was on a mannequin or something, but I imagine if I just pressed this, it would be open, although there's this extra little bit down here that, it's always weird to try and figure out what to do with that. I have a theory. I think that this jumpsuit was basically just pieced together on the actress, like they had a general size, and because I don't know if you noticed, well, we were looking at the upper part, but the seam allowances are basically all different. They range from anywhere from 1/4 inch to, what is it? It's probably more like an inch. Yeah, look at that. That's an inch. Whereas, this side, what is that? That's 3/4 of an inch. And I think she just stood there and whoever was fitting her just pinned the whole 20 panels on this thing, something like that, into place, and got a good fit. And where it was pinned became the seam lines, because almost none of these seams are consistent in direction, and almost none of the seam allowances rather are consistent in terms of size and direction. So I think it was just fitted on her, and let the chips fall where they may. The seam allowances are wonky on the back of the jumpsuit too. You can see right here at the yoke body seam line, they're open right here at the center back. And of course they want to pop up above the armscye seam line, just like they always want to. But they're sewn into the seam open again here on the end at the sleeve. So really, this is just a trouble area with the TNG jumpsuits, in my experience. And obviously, they want to go up, but over here, they want to go up. The sleeve seam allowances want to go up into the yoke, but they're sewn in open. So who knows? You can see here at the center back, they've actually been tacked onto the yoke seam allowance here, but they've been tacked open on both sides. And of course, the zipper seam allowance is larger. Powers that be, the costume department, seem to like in that 1 inch range. This is more like 1 1/8 inches on this side, but then if we look down, it changes quite a bit. You can see, I mean, like, look, the two sides are like different sizes all the way down. But here you can see the tags. Here's for TNG. And then it looks like this jumpsuit was reused with a different actress in Generations. Terry, is it a D? Dunaway. Terry Dunaway. So I don't know who that was in Generations, but you can look it up if you care. I'm sure there's a memory alpha for it somewhere. The side back seam allowances were not quite as wonky as on the front. You can see they are open all the way down. It's quite refreshing. Sewn in, open. But then down at the waist, they get wonky again. You can see they're open along here, and then they're open right at the center back. But then right where that corner is, they want to go down. They're sewn in open over here, and then they want to go down. These seam allowances right here, the zipper seam allowances, were tacked onto, that's what that weird like N or Z shape is right there. I'm zoomed in. Oh, okay, a little bit more. They were tacked onto here to keep those from coming up. Same thing on this side. You can't really see it because it's all on the black piece, but those were tacked onto there. And there's with the corner, similar approach to the front. Let me pick it up and bring it closer. You can see there's a little piece of a lightweight fusible interfacing right there where that corner is. That's long since come detached, but it did its job to help keep that corner nice and sharp. And seam allowance was clipped to the stitching like you would expect, and the excess was not trimmed out of this side. Beneath the zipper, those large center back seam allowances were reduced to a more conventional seam allowance of 5/8 of an inch on each side. It's weird, like it looks like they were trimmed down to that size. It doesn't look like it was originally cut that way, because here you can see a pretty sharp, and then here it's more of like a curve. Well, in this case, obviously she was a shorter actress. I don't know how much that had to do with it, but the opening is only about 4 inches tall, and these varied a lot. Some of them, it seems like they were normally about 6 inches, but I've seen some, they were upwards of 8 or even 10 inches tall, just depending on what mood they were in, I guess. But this particular one's only about 4 inches. The ends of the facing were catch stitched to the underside of the pant leg all the way around, and of course the hem allowance too. You wouldn't stitch all the way through to the pant leg when there's another layer for you to do, not on purpose anyway. Now, normally I'm a pretty big advocate for understitching whenever possible. I think it's great. I love it. It's great. It's a great way to keep your whatever fabric you have on the underside from rolling outward. But in this case, understitching around that top area right here seems to have made kind of like a pucker. And I don't know if that's something specific to this or if that's just inevitable when you're understitching this kind of a shape around that tight of a corner. So I don't know if I would recommend doing it all the time. It would I don't know, you have to clip it pretty sharply. And in fact, the other pant leg is doesn't look quite as good. You can see that stitching is actually kind of coming undone around that top. I don't know if they clipped it too far, or the understitching process messed it up. I don't know, but the end result doesn't look as good. So I don't know. Like I said, ordinarily I'm a pretty big advocate of understitching, but looks like the cost might be too high for this particular area. Rather large hem allowance here. And of course, catch stitching all along the upper edge of the hem allowance, just like you would expect. So here's a weird thing. You just saw on the pant leg how the hem allowance was just turned up and catch stitched across the top, like you would expect to see. But on the sleeves, there was actually a separate hem facing. So you can see the seam line was rolled slightly to the underside, and the seam allowances were understitched to the facing. And then the upper edge was not catch stitched. It was hand sewn with more of a conventional hem stitch. If you watched my Tasha Yar jumpsuit video tour, I explained there that, her uniform was the opposite. She had a hem facing on the pant legs, but not the sleeves. The sleeves were hemmed normally. There was a hem facing on the pant legs. Here, it's the opposite. The pants were hemmed normally, but there's a hem facing on the sleeve. So I explained it in that video, and just briefly here, if you didn't watch that, I think it's an issue of how much fabric there is to work with at the bottom of the sleeve. If you don't have enough hem allowance, then to hem it, you need to extend the sleeve enough to be able to hem it. So in this case, this is the ideal length for the sleeve, but you need to be able to turn it up and hem it. Then you have to cut a separate piece, sew it on, and then turn it under, along, or just slightly beyond that seam line. Like that. And then you basically have sewn on hem allowance. You had to extend the sleeve to be able to do that.
Now I want to watch that episode again.
It is a good episode. Definitely worth watching again.
But I don't want to be sad. I don't have enough ice cream left for that.
We are running low.
I guess I could have some mayonnaise.
That's almost as good?
Maybe with some pickles.
Ew. On that note, I have a special treat for everyone.
Oh yeah?
I patterned this uniform using a technique that I learned in this book, 101 Sewing Secrets. It's a really cool book full of neat tips and tricks, so I'll put a link down below for those of you who are interested. But I patterned it using what they call the rub-off technique.
It's not what it sounds like.
And I'm putting the pattern that I extrapolated from this uniform up on my blog where you can download it for free.
Oh wow.
Now, I'll put the actual measurements up on the blog, but this jumpsuit is tiny. It was definitely made to fit a woman of more petite size.
So not you then.
No. For multiple reasons. Anyway, if you want to give it a go, you can download the pattern on my blog.
www.StarTrekCostumeGuide.com. You're welcome. Hey Alec, do you know who Ensign Sito's cousin is?
No.
Ensign C. Finger.